Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We'll be diving into business email and account compromise, how attackers construct sophisticated target attacks, but most importantly, what you can do as an organization to protect yourselves against them. By way of introduction, my name is Mark Palmer. I'm one of the email security specialists over at Bitez, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Neil Hammett from Proofpoint. To give you some context and not to steal the thunder of Neil, who will no doubt do this more justice myself, but in the modern world that we now live in, things are moving on from attackers traditionally just targeting the end users to attempting to exploit the wider corporate band. Unfortunately, there are still cyber criminals out there, despite everything else that's going on in the world currently, that still want to try and exploit the corporate organizations for their own self-gain and for financial exploitation. Now, before we begin, I just want to take you through some housekeeping. For those of you that have joined a Bitez webinar before, you'll be muted throughout the presentations, but if there are any questions you'd like to submit, you'll see on the right-hand side, there is a questions box. Please pop the questions in there and we'll cover these during the Q&A at the end. We do have a fair few attendees on today, so rest assured that should we not get to your question this afternoon, we're not ignoring you and we will follow up with the relevant answers. This session is fully recorded and will be shared with you once we are finished, so please feel free to share this with any colleagues that maybe couldn't join today, but you feel may be of interest and benefit too. As always, if we could ask that you please take the time at the end to complete the feedback forms, as we want to ensure that these sessions that we host are relevant for our clients and ultimately that we're maximising the precious time that we get to spend with you today. To give you a flavour of today's webinar, here's a brief agenda that we'll work through over the next 30 to 40 minutes. I'm going to cover a very high-level overview of Bitez, but won't spend too long on that today, as the main thing we want to cover is the exploitation against business email compromise, where we will hand over to Neil and he will run you through that. As I mentioned, we will jump back on at the end of the Q&A and we'll try and get through as many questions as possible. So I can see a lot of existing customers on today's webinar, so thank you once again for taking the time out to join us. And whilst most of you on the call will know Bitez, here's a very brief overview. I'm not going to run through each of the boxes on this slide, but what it does do is give you an idea of the vast array of offerings that we can cover within the different business units at Bitez. It should also give you a bit of a flavour of the pedigree that we have within the market. Within each of the boxes, we have licensed specialists, technical as well as pre and post sales resource, and that's on top of the 180 or so account managers that we have servicing customers with the day-to-day needs. What this really allows us to do is enable effective and cost-efficient technology sourcing, adoption, deployment, security and management of both software, hardware, and those cloud-based services. Most of you, if not all of you, will likely be aware that we went through a merger around sort of March, April time last year. And after a year of hard work, Bitez Software Services and Bitez Security Partnerships in the UK are now under one banner. It's brilliant. It gives us more credibility within the market, gives you an idea of the hugely scalable partner that we can be in terms of different types of technology that we work with. Microsoft being the key example, but also AWS and the wider data center. But we also have this hugely credible security practice of around 90 people that cover a whole breadth of solutions from best of breed technology in the security market, but also a cyber security arm right through to first, second and third line support with a number of key technology areas that we work with our customers on. Proofpoint are a prime example of that. We're one of very few select elite partners in the UK and therefore have in-house technical capabilities that provide that value add service and not just licensing. We want to ensure that you guys are getting the most out of your investments. Hopefully that gives you enough of an overview of Bitez, but if you want to know more, please feel free to reach out to your account managers or to myself at the end of the session, and we'll give you a more granular overview. Let's build out. Although on today's webinar, we're talking more about business email compromise, the main business driver that leads to these sort of projects and the strategy around email is the migration of email and other key platforms to the cloud, and most notably Office 365. Due to this, I thought we'd touch very briefly on where Bytes sit in the market. And again, I'm not going to read out or drill into any of the stats, but as you can see on the screen, once again, it shows that we're very much baked into Microsoft proposition, especially around their different cloud offerings. Looking at the stats, and whichever way you chop it up, accreditations, revenue, customers, it doesn't really matter. Bytes are a leading partner in the UK when it comes to Microsoft Cloud. And that is down to our great technical resource and other strategic technologies. But we have in-house and commercial licensing resource, mainly driven by the ability to service our customers around that Microsoft platform. Now, what this does is allow us to be a partner that fully understands Microsoft and fully understands all the great aspects Microsoft brings to you within Office 365 and its other services, but also where the shortfalls and gaps within the technology are, and where we suggest our customers look at best of breed third-party technology solutions to give you an end-to-end, true, secure, most importantly, always available and reliable Office 365 platform. And that brings us to where the likes of Proofpoint and their wide portfolio complement the customer's cloud journey and beyond, to bring it all together and offer that robust solution. And on that note, I'll pass over to Neil. Over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Mark. Appreciate the intro, and it's always good to learn a little bit more about our key partners. Now, I'm just going to hopefully seamlessly transition to sharing my screen. Let's see if that works. No, I think we're seeing a white square. This, give me a second.
Right.
No, it's so I think this is because I had too good a test yesterday, which, right.
There we go, we're on the right screen now, Neil.
Perfect.
Winner, there we go. Right, hopefully that will be the most embarrassing thing I do on this webinar. But let's find out together whether or not that ambition is realised. So thanks again to Mark. I'm a part of the Proofpoint product team. My specific responsibility is a product that we call Email Fraud Defense, which we really won't be talking about a great deal. What we're going to talk about today is the general threat landscape, and specifically the part of the threat landscape that we characterize as BEC and EAC. BEC is actually an acronym that we have the FBI to thank for. It stands for Business Email Compromise. So we're going to take a look at that first. But business email compromise and email account compromise are very closely related and often, in fact, go together within the same attack. What are we talking about? Well, this is a good example. So Pathe, it is the cinema chain, which many of you may have some familiarity with. They are a multinational, headquartered in France, quite successful. And a few years ago, they had a significant problem. Now, how that came about is kind of interesting. And actually, we've discovered quite a lot about what happened here, not because Pathe wanted to tell us, but because of the subsequent court case. So an awful lot of information on what occurred was published as part of the court transcripts. And that court transcript will form part of why I feel that this is quite an interesting example of this sort of thing and why you should care fundamentally. So what happened? Well, initially, the bad actor impersonated the chief executive of the French company, the French organization, which was the parent part of Pathe. So that was the senior chief exec. The bad actor impersonated the chief exec, emailed the chief exec of the Dutch entity, one Jutta Meijer, and asked for her help in executing a purchase of a new organization which was to be folded into the Pathe group. Now, Jutta Meier was quite conscientious. She discussed this with her CFO, a guy called Edwin Sluter, the guy who eventually brought the court action. More on that in a sec. They discussed the email that she'd received, and after discussing it, they decided that it was legitimate. So Jutta Meier and Edwin decided to do what they were being asked to do. Now, what was that, you may say? Well, they were being asked to help with funding for the acquisition. And the reason they were being asked to help to do this was because of corporate confidentiality, and they couldn't run the risk of information leakage from the French part of the organization. All of these things which our security analysts find very, very familiar when they pick through the forensic detail of these things, or as they frequently do, get involved live in the middle of, as our American friends call this, the robbery in progress. So when our analysts spot this type of conversation and flag it to, bring this sort of thing to a halt. Unfortunately, we weren't involved in this. So what happened was as follows. The bad actor, as I say, impersonated the chief exec, requested a payment be made. That payment was made to Towering Stars LLC, an organization that's had bank accounts in Dubai. There were 4 payments made in total, and they followed a very, very familiar pattern. Again, a pattern that our threat team would be able to describe from numerous different examples of different attacks that they have seen. That first payment is generally fairly modest. Why is it modest? Well, the bad actors want to test to see, does the account work? Does the process work? Did they actually believe me? Are they going to go through with it? Can I get the money out of the account after they've transferred it in there? So they will use a relatively minor sum because it may not work, right? They may not have set things up correctly. They may not have got the password. But the other key thing is that once the victims, because they are victims, have made that first transfer, they're also kind of committed now. Once you've made that transfer, you've brought into the whole thing. You have acted in good faith. You've discharged your duties to the best of your abilities, and you have, in this case, transferred the first payment into that account in Dubai. Now, this sadly was not enough to purchase the new company, so Jutta Meier and Edwin Sluter were asked to make a follow-up transfer. In total, they made 4 transfers that totaled 19.2 million euros. Now, you may be wondering, well, how did this come to light? What stopped this? What happened next? And you may be hoping that we're going to tell you about some cunning security monitoring software or service, or that somebody within the organization received an alert, or maybe the bank stepped in, or maybe something that speaks of good process, good design, good security happened. But it didn't. What happened was they ran out of cash. They were asked to make a 5th transfer, and they actually had to contact one of the other organizations within the Pathe group to say, we've been asked to make this transfer, but we've got no more money. Could you help us out? The other part of the organization said no, and we really don't think you're meant to be doing this. An audit followed. Jutta and Edwin were both sacked, and the problem came to light. The problem being, of course, that they had transferred almost 20 million euros to a bad actor because the bad actor had pretended to be their chief exec and had asked them for it. Now, before we go much further, we should probably talk about how difficult it was to mount that attack. And the bad news is, whilst this looks sophisticated, to Jutta, to Edwin, the emails they received were indistinguishable from legitimate business communications that they had received in the past from the French chief executive. It was one of the major reasons that they went along with this, because they simply didn't believe that they could receive email from the chief exec that was identical to previous email, there must be something, some part of email that would stop that from happening, that would stop that level of impersonation. But sadly, they were wrong. If you are particularly bored at any point, you can look up the SMTP RFC. Line 7.1 begins, email is inherently insecure. There is literally nothing within the email specification itself to prevent this type of attack, to prevent what we commonly refer to as domain spoofing. And in this specific case was the bad actor sending an email that looked exactly like one that had come from the legitimate account of the French chief exec. Now, it may look sophisticated, but unfortunately it is not technically sophisticated. If we were to stop and not go through the rest of this presentation, but instead give you guys a primer on how to do this, I have 100% confidence that every single last person on this webinar would be able to launch such an attack by the finishing time that everyone was anticipating when they logged on. Now, we're not going to do that, unfortunately, but it's something that requires a very low barrier to be cleared by the bad actor, but it's something that requires an asymmetric response from the victim. The victim has to have a fairly sophisticated, mature, and well-developed security model to actually prevent this kind of attack from being successful. The good news, if they had fully deployed a sensible approach to resolving this problem, then there is literally no way this attack could have been successful in the way that it was mounted. And if you speak to your account manager from Bytes, they can run you through exactly how we can do an initial audit and then an evaluation and show you what changes would need to be made to ensure that not one of you would ever be put into the position that Geert Meyer and Edwin Sluiter were. We would do that by deploying a protocol called DMARC and making some fairly sophisticated configuration updates on your perimeter gateways, whatever they might be. Now, I mentioned earlier that we heard about this because we read about this in the various court transcripts. Edwin sued for wrongful dismissal. He sued for wrongful dismissal because the point he made, he had at every single stage in this whole process done what he had thought had been the right thing. He pointed out that he had discharged his duties rapidly, accurately, and he had been responding in every case to a direct request put to him by his superiors. Geert Meyer was his chief exec. The French gentleman was also legitimately his superior. And to the extent to which all of the systems and the processes and the training that had been provided to him by Pathe prepared him for this situation, he had performed the checks that he thought he should perform. He had discussed this with his manager, Geert Meyer. He had then proceeded in good faith to transfer this money. And the court agreed with him. The court agreed that he had always acted in good faith. And that's important. What that does is set a precedent. It says that in this case, because Pathe could have prevented this, they could have deployed DMARC on the domains that they own, they could have configured their gateways to make use of that DMARC policy, they could therefore have blocked and deleted at their perimeter without ever risking delivery every single malicious email sent by the bad actor that looked identical to the legitimate communications from the chief exec. But they had not done so, then Pathe had to basically accept a degree of liability here. And they had to pay Edwin his salary back from the point that he was sacked up to the point of the court case. Obviously, things were a little bit fraught by that point, so he was never going to be reinstated. And I don't think anyone really ever considered that part to be kind of likely. But key thing was here, it was judged to not be Edwin's fault, and it was judged to not be his fault because there were things that the company could have done that would have prevented this fairly impressive loss. And this kind of goes on and on and on. You know, there are plenty of stories that we can pick to talk about here. Some personal kind of favorites, if that's not the wrong way of putting it, on the screen here. Nikkei, the owner of the Financial Times, that was in October a couple of years ago, and it was almost a carbon copy of the Pathe problem. A moderately senior executive received an email from someone he truly and sincerely believed to be a very senior executive who asked him to make a transfer. So he made the transfer. He transferred $29 million. Unfortunately, the person who he believed was his senior director was in fact a bad actor enjoying a very, very significant payday. Lazio, again, same thing. Identity being weaponized by a bad actor, the legitimate identity of, in this case, a pair of different football teams. This one is interesting because once again, it sets precedent. So what happened? Briefly, Lazio bought a football player called Stefan de Vrij from Feyenoord. Stefan de Vrij was fairly expensive. Lazio agreed to pay in installments. Ahead of the final €2 million installment being paid, Lazio received an email that looked identical to a legitimate business communication that they received from Feyenoord, and the person that had sent them the email asked for the account that the money was going to be paid into to be changed. Now, it was the same branch of the bank that had the correct account. So same town, same city, same sort code. It was only the account number that changed. And of course, Lazio was receiving an email from somebody they knew and trusted. And that's a key part of why these attacks are successful, because people don't recognize it as being an attack, because the identity that the bad actor uses is typically that of someone they trust, somebody within their supply chain, somebody with whom they may well have a fairly close relationship, but also crucially, somebody that they're not likely to bump into just in the street, in the daily discharge of their duties. So they'll never actually just get to interact with that person in a way that could bring the attack to light. So what happened was Lazio sent the money to this account, thinking nothing more of it. Feyenoord then a few weeks later sent them an email saying, "Hi, are you going to pay the final €2 million? Is that going to happen?" And then these things came to light. Now, this ended up in court, just as Pathe did. Specifically, in this case, it ended up in the Court for Arbitration for Sport. And the judgment came back probably in a way that made everybody unhappy. The judgment was that both parties were at fault. Why were both parties at fault? Well, they could have taken steps to have prevented this. They could have deployed DMARC that would have stopped the malicious email. They could have made configuration changes to their perimeter that would have stopped this type of attack from being possible. But they had not done that. They'd not taken other steps also. But what that meant was that both of them had to accept some responsibility. So Feyenoord had to accept that they were only getting half of that final payment. But of course, Lazio had to accept that they had to make half that final payment, in addition to the payment that they had already made to the bad actor who had removed the money from the account that they had successfully got Lazio to put it into really very quickly indeed, as you could imagine. Now, why is this important, other than being an entertaining story about football teams, which does get some people's interest? It's again because of the precedent here. It's been evaluated by some fairly expensive lawyers, and it's been judged that both parties were at fault here. So that in of itself, I think, is interesting and worrying also. Precedent is always something that should concern us. But as security professionals, we need to look at how do we manage that risk? How do we look at our closest partners, those that we do business with possibly every single day? And how do we protect what is valuable, which is our ability to work closely with them, to work rapidly with them, to work without frictions, whilst removing the risk that every one of those close relationships actually represents? Because be under no illusions, the more valuable a business relationship to you, to your organization, the more profitable that relation, the more dangerous it is, the higher the risk that that identity poses to you and your organization. Because if a bad actor impersonates that organization or even compromises that organization, you are running a real risk. Now, in the interest of time, I won't run through the others, but I imagine quite a lot of people are familiar with the Crelin situation, because that was another colossal loss, probably less so with the Texas school district, but again, significant losses. And realistically going only one way. Now, this is part of a longer term trend, and it's part of a trend that we're going to talk about in more depth over the coming few slides. But the critical thing to take on board is this. The bad actors know that these attacks work. They know that these attacks work today in an environment where we have arguably got the best security we've ever had, where applications are generally very secure, where it is unusual, but of course not impossible, for us to hear of significant breaches. You know, they are, I think, more notable now because of their increasing rarity. We don't tend to have that rapid cadence of announcements of, you know, loopholes and weaknesses and breaches that we used to years ago. But still, against that background of security that is ever getting better, the losses continue to mount. And that is because the bad actors are leveraging that kind of oldest vulnerability, I suppose, that human beings possess, which is that if we think we're doing something for someone we know, something reasonable, something that we're being asked to do by, you know, if not a friend, by a colleague who we know and like and respect, then no security control in the world is going to stop us, pretty much. And it's bypassing the controls that we've put in place and asking our own users to do something in a way that looks like it's a request coming from a known friendly party that is so dangerous, that makes these attacks so difficult to combat. Okay, so I'm just going to build this out quickly. It's not that complex, but email fraud that we've been talking about so far has been largely comprised of spoofing, but it is, has a partner, email account compromise. Now, this is, as the name might suggest, where the bad actor may well actually have gained access to the legitimate infrastructure belonging to a trusted partner, a key customer, or somebody with whom the company otherwise has a relationship of some sort, maybe a design collaboration or what have you. Very famously, Target was never breached directly. Target was breached via their air conditioning contractor. So this is a route into the organization which the bad actors know of and are very familiar with. When we're looking at the BEC side of it, that is further split into some larger categories, and it's helpful to understand the terminology so that we can have conversations about these things. Obviously, one of the primary routes is domain spoofing. That's what got Pathe, Lazio, Nikkei, Crelin into significant trouble. And this is frustrating in a way because it's something that we can fix. If we deploy DMARC and if we deploy DMARC properly, and properly is a key word there, you need to be able to deploy in a way that is aware of and has visibility into business systems, not only those systems that send email to consumers. Then you can basically fix this problem in SMTP. Display name spoofing. This is and will, I suspect, remain the most popular type of attack because it is probably the easiest. It's also the type of attack that we are most reliant upon a sophisticated classification system within the gateway that we choose to protect ourselves with. You know, being able to correctly identify what is malicious, what is not, at very high volumes and under a great deal of pressure, dealing with live mail flow. Finally, we have lookalike domains. This is it bridges that world of domain spoofing over into display names somewhat. And it's something that you will need to have again, a slightly different technique in order to address fully. It can't be resolved just by making your display name engine better. And of course, you don't own these domains, so you can't put into place the protections that you would for domains that you own, or potentially even domains that your key partners use. EAC, so ultimately this all boils down to a bad actor getting direct physical access to a legitimate account through a variety of different techniques: brute forcing or password spray type attacks, straight up phishing. So you'll often see, as a for instance, your Outlook web access password has been reset. Please log in here to reset it type attacks, which are simply designed to harvest credentials that can then be used to compromise accounts. Or it might be malware within an email, multiple different techniques, all a single aim, which is to get into that account and to then make use of it at the right moment. And of course, we've seen time and time again, bad actors may compromise an account and then wait months, if not years, to use it, because they will wait for the correct opportunity to arise. And it may only need to be a single email sent for them to achieve their goals. So holding a lot of access to all of these different accounts is often a really key value for the bad actor. Another kind of reason why this is a growing and pernicious issue for us all, I think to some extent or another, we are probably all still stuck with a slightly kind of 90s mindset, which is that we protect things. We have a perimeter which protects the network. We have file servers which we must authenticate against because the data that is within them is valuable. We have databases, again, we must protect the data there. We have financial systems which we must protect. And that's fine, but bad actors increasingly don't care how good a job we've done at protecting, let's say, the cash transfer system, because they are never going to try and break into that. What they're going to do is they are going to convince a person with legitimate access to the cash transfer system, such as Edwin Sluter, that they need to make a transfer which is fully legitimate, which happens to be to an account under the control of the bad actor. Now, you can have the finest and best security anywhere in the world on a system, but if it's being accessed by the people who are legitimately entitled to use it, that security is going to avail you nothing, because the person, not the machine, has been compromised. And that is the problem that you're trying to deal with. And that's a space which the bad actors are much, much more comfortable with than I think we as defenders are currently. And I think that's one of the biggest changes that we can all bring to our organizations if we want to be more effective. We need to be increasingly focused on how we defend people rather than systems. And that in that way, we will be able to put ourselves much more in the mindset of the bad actor and look at, okay, if I consider that my people with access to this finance system are all vulnerable to attack, how do I give them training? How do I put in place process? How do I look at configuring the systems? How do I make global or strategic changes to how our identity is handled that protect these individuals from being exploited by bad actors? Now, this is all fairly complex, and unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand, or as the slide here says, no silver bullet. Rather, what I'm going to recommend for the way that we deal with this situation is that sort of, I suppose, classic multi-layered defensive model. No one thing is going to solve this problem, but intelligently designed, intelligently deployed, multiple integrated systems can give us the visibility and the ability to mitigate these attacks that are, that are required by the modern enterprise. From the business email compromise side, gateway configuration, gateway visibility, and of course, strong authentication. Strong authentication deployed in line with the DMARC RFC, which resolves the inherent security vulnerabilities present in SMTP email, I think are a minimum now for all organizations, because those of us who have not yet deployed are sending out to signal that we are vulnerable to the type of attack that cost Pathe 19.2 million euros, that cost Lazio 1.75 million, that cost Kralin 70 million euros. We need to consider that email itself has a fundamental vulnerability when it comes to identity, and then we need to fix it. In terms of the broader ecosystem, we all now are heavily reliant upon cloud services, cloud delivered applications, and of course we now therefore have to make secure the process by which our users gain access to these and forbid bad actors from being able to do the same thing. It is also extremely useful to have a system which bridges the email system, where, for example, password resets and so on are sent out, and the web applications, SharePoint, etc., that our users rely upon, because a bad actor will very happily use multiple techniques which use multiple different vectors. So our response needs to, or would strongly benefit from, also being able to have visibility across all of those different channels, as it were. So visibility, I think, is really key. Just to kind of make a point there, I mentioned at the beginning that I work for the email fraud defense product, which is our identity deception service product, probably a blend of both. We generate 35 terabytes of data daily, every 24 hours, and that data set is pertaining to email attacks, authentication that we see flowing between the various different gateways that are deployed around the world. And that's just one product. The volumes of data that we're talking about here are staggeringly vast. And Proofpoint has a huge amount of experience at bringing back from that massive amount of data what is relevant and what is meaningful, and also then providing the remediation. And of course, this is key. Having an alert is useless, realistically, without then well, what do we do? How do we solve this problem? How do we close the account, lock out access, reset the password, do whatever we need to do to stop the robbery in progress, or to stop the compromise? And I think, probably overlooked a lot of the time, how do we tie our security awareness and training into all of this? A great example of this, email fraud defense enables you to put a warning tag in emails that are coming from a supplier who we know to have been compromised. So it's a legitimate email, it's arriving in the inbox of, say, one of your finance team. So we put a tag in that email warning them, look, this may be a legitimate email, but it may not be, because we know that the sender's organization has been compromised by bad actors. Please contact the sender of this email using a different channel. This will scare the hell out of them if they don't know it's coming. So, with all of these initiatives, with all the process updates, training them through your organization is going to be really key. You want your users to be working in tune with your own security team. You want your users to be aware of and embracing the changes you make to your organization, which are going to protect everyone within that organization. You don't want to be surprising them, because if you surprise them, the reaction is unpredictable and often not the one that you actually want to encourage. Okay, I'm going to have to speed up because I am running out of time. So my apologies if the next bit is a little bit frantic. As I mentioned earlier, Proofpoint has a very, sort of, I suppose, classic multi-layered approach to these things. We bring to bear on the vast bulk of the attacks that we see a machine learning based system, stateful composite scoring system, or the imposter classifier for short, and we'll look at that in slightly more detail in a second. This knocks back 85% of all email that we actually see any organization receiving on average, and this includes sort of bulk, fairly unsophisticated attacks, all the way through to highly targeted single email type stuff. But it's not enough. On its own, it's fantastic, it's best in class, it's, according to Gartner, extremely impressive, but you need more. It still benefits very strongly from having specific initiatives that deal with domain spoofing, lookalike domains, that piece which is covered by a complementary product, which is email fraud defense. We will layer the gateway with email fraud defense. We will then put on top of that something called targeted attack protection, which is our predictive sandboxing environment. The sandboxing environment enables us to examine in detail a file or a URL before a user clicks on it or opens it, so that we can condemn that before they get to it. But also, if that file or URL goes bad after delivery, post-delivery, and often this is a technique employed by the bad actors, we can still block that because we continue monitoring, and at a point of click, we can examine what the content is going to be, and if it's changed from something anodyne into something malicious in the interim, we can then take action. Putting this together, if you considered each channel through which a bad actor may choose to attack you, that also then gives you the foundation which you can build upon in order to extend this protection out to your closest business partners, your supply chain. The protections that you've put in place should be mirrored by the protections that they have put in place. And working with your Bytes account manager and your Proofpoint security team, we can guide you through how, working together in partnership with your supply chain, you can increase dramatically the level of security for everybody involved there. Just sort of a quick comparison, sort of more traditional approaches, I suppose, with the machine learning approach taken by Proofpoint. And one note here, I feel slightly uncomfortable about using the terms machine learning and artificial intelligence, because literally everybody uses these terms. They've kind of become somewhat debased, I think. But just a note here, Proofpoint has been a leader in this field since 2002. Your machine learning is, or using the machine learning term is kind of pointless. What it boils down to is efficacy. Can you prove that your systems detect more threats more of the time with fewer false positives than anyone else's? And when it comes to that, Proofpoint can say, yes, absolutely, we can. This is something we are really, really very good at. And it's because, as you can see on the right there, we take a very integrated approach and we allow the algorithm itself to learn and grow and to actually understand what communication looks like within that organization. So as a for example, it would see a relationship exists between your organization and a key business partner. It would see that you've received an email that is coming from the identity used there, but it's not come from the normal IP. If it's not come from the normal IP, then maybe this is something unusual. Now, of course, the filters will be looking at things like content, but we've been discussing the fact that the content can be indistinguishable from a legitimate business email. That then means, well, let's take a look at the IP address. And I mentioned earlier that, just the email fraud defense part of Proofpoint, we generate roughly 35 terabytes of data per 24 hours. That's a drop in the ocean compared to the data lake being created by the gateways. That data lake provides highly detailed information on the vast majority of IPs out there in the world, which means that we will be able to use that information to classify the level of risk represented by that IP address. All of these things are only individual and quite small signals, but put together and amplified by comparing data from one organization, but then also broadening the aperture to look at the data from all of our other gateways, means that we can provide a level of accuracy and therefore efficacy which is out of reach of most other actors in this space. Now, I think we mentioned this before, but I think one of the key things that Proofpoint has been doing for some time now is moving the focus to the person. And indeed, you can see here, this is our very attacked person reports. So what we're doing is we're bringing back in this screen detailed information on the individuals, the people within an organization that are most attacked. You can see the bar here is illustrating how are they being attacked, and it's a little bit small, so my apologies, but you'll be able to see that each of the different colors is a different type of threat being suffered by the individual in question. The goal here is to be able to provide detailed drill down information on the individual threats being sent to the individual people, again, so that you can craft your security policies in such a way that they take into account the needs of your specific situation, your specific individuals who are being targeted by bad actors, so that you can then bring to bear, process, education, additional filtering if required, and overall be prepared, I suppose, for what might come up next. The other thing to note here is that you need automation within your environment if you're going to cope successfully in the modern day. There are too many alerts, there are too many detections for anything other than a tremendously enormous analyst team to be able to cope with. So you need to have a very high level of trust in the orchestration elements of any solution that you're going to deploy, because that is going to be doing a very significant portion of the heavy lifting, freeing up your analysts to be able to focus in on the targeted threats that represent the biggest danger to your organization. Finally, and as I mentioned on looking at our multi-layered defensive model, training is really key, especially if you're affecting rapid change within the security environment. Having training which dovetails with that is really important, because your users need to know what to expect. They need to have the basics on, well, what does an attack look like? What can I look out for? How can I be part of the response here? But they also need to be clued in on, well, if my computer's just done this, is that expected? should this be happening? What am I meant to do? Am I meant to just calmly forward this, or am I meant to use the fish alarm button, which is something that is free for all of our customers to put in their email client, which then would validate whether or not what I've just seen is an attack? But the last thing you want to do is surprise your users. You want every interaction that they have with the security function to be predictable, because if anyone's surprised, that does suggest that something's going wrong. So training is a really key part of success here. So back to our multi-layered model. Key thing is you do need to have something from each of these spheres in order for your organization to be safe and secure. If we look at what that means in terms of technology, well, it's a significant and quite complex and very varied environment, potentially. Or, of course, and I'm sure you're all sat there thinking, well, you would say that, but it is true. Proofpoint, of course, is highly active and is industry leading in all of these sectors. So if this is something that you would be interested in getting a more integrated, more intelligence-led response to, and dramatically increasing the security of not only your own organization, but that of the partner organizations that you work with, speak to your Bytes account manager, and they can walk you through how we can set up an evaluation of what Proofpoint could actually bring to you. And as I say, that integration approach from Proofpoint, that security as a platform approach, can bring very significant security increases, whilst also significantly simplifying your basic architecture with regards to security. Okay, I'm going to park it there because I think we've got 8 minutes left, and I want to give some time to questions. So, Mark, how can I give this back to you?
Just like that. There you go. Magic.
Now, $60,000 question. Did I do anything that embarrassed me as much as my initial inability?
No, absolutely not. That was really, really good. Thank you, Neil. Yeah, it was definitely, certainly very useful and insightful. I hope everybody on the call found it just as interesting as I did. As we said at the beginning, we are running the Q&A, so should you have any questions, please pop them in the questions box on the right hand side, and we will go through them. So we've got a couple, Neil, and hopefully we'll have some more as we go through. The first one is, I'm using Microsoft E5, their license for full security. How can Proofpoint and where can Proofpoint help here?
So that's a great question, and I think it's one that we're being asked more and more frequently these days, and it sort of speaks to a bigger point in a way. So I'm not trying to avoid the question. I will get back to it, but we don't see ourselves as being in competition with Microsoft, or vice versa, really. Yes, we do have some products that overlap, but we also have areas where there's absolutely no kind of duplication. People will need to secure their Microsoft environment. We've, of course, seen over recent days the result of the Hafnium group, theoretically, and their assault upon the world's on-prem exchange servers. So where we see Proofpoint coming in is to really help people to get much more value from their Microsoft investment by addressing any security concerns that may be present, by being able to isolate, monitor, reduce any approaches that a bad actor might be able to take to compromise that infrastructure. For instance of that would be our CASB product, used in combination with Microsoft's very, very good and very valuable array of online services. Our CASB product can ensure that compromised accounts are immediately flagged, immediately remediated. Automation is brought to bear. Also, the approach, the initial attempts by bad actors to compromise these accounts are flagged, alerted, and immediate remediation can be carried out by the analysts and so on. So it's very much a partnership, very much something that, for example, we work with highly valued partners such as Bytes to really drive forwards the integration between the two to get the best from each world, I suppose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess from a Bytes perspective, to kind of bolster what you've said there, As you saw from the slides at the beginning, we are a massive Microsoft house. It is our bread and butter, but we do have the solutions that ultimately will complement, but also conflict in areas against Microsoft. So that's certainly something that we as Bytes would relish the opportunity to show anybody out there that's considering, I guess, the wider Microsoft suite, the benefits, but ultimately we want to make you aware of the good, the bad, and hopefully help you make the best decision to offer that full solution that wraps around everything that you do. So yeah, perfect, really good question. The second question was mainly around the business email compromise, but obviously email fraud defense. And the question is, can it be a standalone piece of technology, or does it require leveraging the Proofpoint gateway to ultimately maximize what it can do?
No, absolutely, it can be delivered standalone, and that's it's one of its strengths, I think. There are obviously some advantages to having the Proofpoint gateway, but it is absolutely not a requirement. And indeed, we've got roughly 10% of our revenues at the moment in EMEA are from customers who do not have the Proofpoint gateway and have no intention in some cases of ever looking at the Proofpoint gateway, which is of course a different problem for us to try and address. But it's something that relies upon standard protocols, and the information is then bolstered by proprietary data that Proofpoint generates itself. But that brings value to anyone. So if you've got Ironport or Message Labs or Fortinet or whatever it might be, then absolutely we can help, and we can help you to dramatically improve the security of every one of those solutions.
Perfect. Another question, does Proofpoint Essentials include the DMARC offering?
Yes, and that's being built into it. I'm not sure whether it's released yet, but I'm working closely with the product team from the Essentials side of the house to build all of that in. It's been, I think, one of the #1 requested feature upgrades for Essentials for some time now, and it just really was a case of getting through all of the other updates that were also key priorities, so that we could get the engineering team some space to take a look at that. But if that's not present right now, it will be coming very shortly, and I'll find out what the reality is of that one and make sure that your Bytes account manager lets you know.
Perfect. Somebody's asked a question to get a comparison matrix between Microsoft E5, Mimecast and Proofpoint. That's something that we as Bytes can help you with. That's no problem at all. Essentials. Does the DMARC option just automate what can be traditionally configured manually, or is there some additional features and benefits?
So the DMARC part of email fraud defense is obviously a big piece of its value, but it lives alongside the lookalike domain piece, and also the ability to characterize and score your entire supply chain and then bring adaptive controls to that. So viewing EFD as only the DMARC offering isn't the correct way of really evaluating what it would do for the organization. But with that said, looking at how the DMARC piece within it operates, we take in the DMARC reporting generated by the global ISP community, so largely Gmail, Yahoo, AOL, Comcast, and so on, since Microsoft stopped sending reports back in 2017. And then it adds all of the business-to-business detail that we generate from our gateways. And that's really key. If you want to be able to do a complete job of deploying DMARC, then you need to be aware of what data is available to you. So if what you are setting out to do is to protect consumers, members of the public, from being attacked by bad actors using your identity, which is a really, really good thing to do, then that can be achieved using the free-to-air DMARC data that the ISP community currently provide for free. But if what you are seeking to do is to protect business communications, your business partners, your supply chain, and your own users, then you would benefit from using Proofpoint email fraud defense, because exclusive to us is that business to business data taken from our gateways, and we can provide inbound DMARC data from any gateway that you might happen to have. Of course, benefits to having the Proofpoint gateway, but as we mentioned earlier, not exclusive to that. But we can provide that true 360-degree implementation that no other provider can. And that's because we generate our own data, and we then provide that data with world-leading expertise. So I think we're currently sitting at 32% of the Fortune 1000 for the email fraud defense product. Our next nearest competitor is at around 8% and falling. We are, by every metric, dominant in this sector, and it's because we have that business-to-business data that no one else does, and we have the expertise to get our clients rapidly, with zero worry about collateral damage, to the point of vastly enhanced security.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. And there is another question around organizations having DMARC set up incorrectly, and ultimately the impact that will have on other issues with suppliers and customers. I guess conscious of time and the fact that we've already overrun, there's still a fair few questions that we would like to answer. So look, if we'll wrap things up there, we will reach out to everybody with the questions that we weren't able to get to today, and come back to you with some answers. I guess the answer to a fair few of them around how to validate the solutions, it's a bit of a shameless plug on the end, but we as Bitez are working in conjunction with Proofpoint to offer a few different free of charge assessments around the email gateway, DMARC, and the end user awareness piece. So if that's something that is of interest to you, I believe it's on the questionnaire at the end, and if you feel that you'd like to know a little bit more about it, and or take the opportunity to leverage that, please feel free to tick the box, and we'll reach out to you on that piece as well. So thank you very much, Neil. That was amazing. You gave everybody a lot of food for thought, hopefully, and a lot of key takeaways. I appreciate everybody taking the time to join. Thank you all again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks very much. Bye all.